My mom and I are cleaning out our garage right now, and we found a gnome, garden gnome, that belonged to a cousin of mine who we lost a while ago. And my mom wants to keep the gnome. It's broken, but we'll see what's going on with that one down the line. Um, I personally have never been a big fan of garden gnomes. Simply, I just find them slightly creepy looking. I don't know why, I just do. But then in Digimon, in Digimon Tamers, they have the DigiGnomes that are much cuter. And if I could have like a statue of, some of these things in my yard, I'd be perfectly happy with that, considering they are exceedingly adorable and mischievous and responsible for several things that happen throughout the course of the series. So, this video is going to be about the digital gnomes, the DigiGnomes, that are in Digimon Tamers. They live in the digital world, but they do, to a degree, have the ability to affect or pass into the real world in small amounts. So the DigiGnomes are digital creatures that evolved alongside the Digimon in the digital world. And they have the power to grant wishes in the real and the digital world. That's the basic explanation that we get for them. The actual development through the development of the series, they were introduced by one of the screenwriters, and eventually they were designed to help be something that can help explain why, why Gilmon got created, or why Calamon got turned from the Catalyst into Calamon, and different things along those lines, because they needed something that could explain that, because Gilmon just kind of appears at the end of the first episode. And he's this brand new Digimon that Takato created. And yet he is there, he is living, he is breathing, he is real. And the DigiGnomes are a reason for that. DigiGnomes combined with Takato's imagination are a reason for that. And they also decided that the digital world would not just strictly have Digimon, which is kind of, I think, the first case we've seen of this. I don't remember there being anything that was not like a Digimon, besides the Digidestin, of course, that were in the original Digi world. In regards to living beings, well, there was Jedi, but I guess that's a little bit of a different technicality, because he's connected to something that's designed to help help monitor the digital world. But then even later on, there's not really a whole lot of that in regards to stuff in Digimon Frontier that I'm thinking of. I don't really know anything beyond that for some of the other series. There might be something else where the DigiGnomes show back up again, but the main part that I'm familiar with is what happens in Digimon Tamers, which is what I'm going to talk about. So, throughout the course of the story, we kind of get this, kind of back belt setup for what happened with the DigiGnomes. So, generally the setup that we have for them is that alongside the Digimon and the D-Reaper, or the program that would eventually become the D-Reaper, they were created in the 1980s by the Monster Makers, by John Yu and Dolphin and Daisy and Curly and all of them, and Shibumi and all of that they were created there. The Digimon were the main product they were working on, and then the D-Reaper was kind of this side thing that was designed to, help keep things in check. The next two videos are going to be about the D-Reaper, obviously. And then the DigiGnomes were just kind of these, I don't know, they appeared there. They were a form of an artificial life form, but they seemed to be something that was outside of what the Digimon or what the D-Reaper were. The Digimon, the base forms of them had been designed by the programmers, and then they evolved into what would eventually be, the Sovereigns and everything else down the line. And the D-Reaper was there as well as a way of keeping things in check. And then it evolved and, of course, got out of control much later on. But in regards to the DigiGnomes, they were just kind of there. So I don't know if it was like the DigiGnomes seeing how much effort that the programmers put into creating the Digimon, that the DigiGnomes were kind of the reason the Digimon got made in the beginning in the first place, or if the DigiGnomes were this kernel of wishes, of hopes that the programmers had, and then that eventually is what evolved into the DigiGnomes alongside the Digimon and the D Reaper. Either one can work for my headcanon there. So it's explained by Azulongmon that during, the very early ages of the digital world, that the DigiGnomes, the D Reaper, and the Digimon all kind of existed somewhat harmoniously. Eventually, the D Reaper is, put into hibernation, and that's why the Digimon and the DigiGnomes are able to flourish. So, and eventually it ends up resulting in, when we get to the present, where the Digimon Tamers series is actually taking place, Azulongmon has the DigiGnomes turn the catalyst into Calamon, and then send Calamon to the real world, so that way Calamon would be safer there. So the light of Digivolution would be safer there. So that's kind of one of the things that the DigiGnomes do. And then they're, I think it's kind of like, it depends on how big the wish is, and that might cause the DigiGnomes to just kind of use up all of their power. They're very mischievous, and they're obviously based on like fairies, because gnomes are a type of fairy. And what ends up happening is, so Calamon gets sent to the real world via Azulongmon's request of the DigiGnomes. And then we have this interaction with Takato, where Takato, finds the blue card. It's kind of hinted that the DigiGnomes might be part of the reason that the blue cards are able to be distributed, or that they show up at various points in time. Why Takato gets one, why Henry gets one, why Rika gets one, why, a year ago or so prior to the series that, Ryu got pulled into the digital world. That may have been because of a DigiGnome. In each one of those cases, causing those things to happen. Granting the wish that was in the heart of each one of the Tamers. Or in the case of Cyberdramon, a want to have someone that's strong enough to be its partner. So we kind of have some of that concept that I just kind of like as like headcanon. And eventually it does, of course, result in, Takato draws up all of the stuff for Gilmon, all the blueprints for Gilmon, and then they get scanned by his D-Arc. And then what happened was, it's much later explained by Shibumi, but it's the DigiGnomes read the data that, Takato had written down and everything for all the blueprints and everything of Gilmon. And then they took that base of that data and then gathered up all of this extra data that they had, because like the digital world has lots of different extra data just lying around, the little digital tumbleweeds. Gathered up a bunch of those and then put them into the specs of the data, and then that formed into Gilmon, and then Gilmon was able to hatch into the real world and be with Takato. The DigiGnomes are part of the reason why Takato has Gilmon in the first place, or the reason Gilmon was created. They took all this excess data, pushed it into the mold, and made Gilmon. Yes, they make what would become like the base form of Gilmon. Gilmon and Takato are responsible for how Gilmon grows and what he becomes and everything, but they're integral in Gilmon's creation and all of that stuff. So that's kind of like, we don't really get a whole lot of an explanation for that until much further into the series. But eventually, of course, the Digimon end up in the real world. Via Digidestined, the Tamers have to go to the digital world to save Calamon from Akuramon and Chuchalmon. They go there. And various points in time while they're in the digital world, Rika ends up on her own, and she ends up interacting with the DigiGnomes, and they kind of help lead her to Calamon. They're very mischievous little things, as I said. And they also kind of help Calamon at one point, because when Calamon's cage gets stuck in one of the layers of the digital world, when Makuramon's trying to take Calamon down to the digital world, after Makuramon leaves, the DigiGnomes kind of show up, fly around Calamon, and, help Calamon get out of the cage, because Calamon kind of wishes he was free, so they help him get out. And then the DigiGnomes kind of follow Calamon around as he's going through the digital world trying to find the Tamers, because he finds their flag, and then he kind of wears the flag as a cape and runs around with that on. And several times, one of the things that happens is that Calamon ends up, kind of activating part of his power in regards to being the catalyst, and causes some Digimon to evolve, and that power is spread by the DigiGnomes, and then so we get a connection there. And eventually, the DigiGnomes are helpful, but as I said, they're also mischievous, but they can also get scared. They get scared at times by like Makuramon and Majiramon, the Dragon Deva, get scared away by them at one point in time, and that allows Makuramon to like capture Calamon again. But then there's another time where when Rika and Renamon have been separated from the others, they're traveling through one of the forests, and Rika kind of asks what the DigiGnomes are, and Renamon says she was slightly able to tell them what they are. She's like, well, they're called DigiGnomes, but she didn't really know what to explain to them. And what ends up happening is the DigiGnomes, like, Rika's kind of just like sitting and waiting for Renamon to get back with food. And Renamon knows her way around the digital world to a degree. She knows how to survive there, so it makes sense that Renamon would be the one to go and look for food. And Rika ends up, like, the DigiGnomes are around Rika, and they kind of end up kind of like grabbing her and like kind of dragging her away, and they end up dragging her to where Calamon is, where, well, Rika gets kind of washed into like the river, and then she gets saved by Calamon. So it's like the DigiGnomes were trying to lead Rika to where Calamon was, because they know that Calamon will be safe with Rika in that regard. And I kind of also think that they are slightly responsible for why Takato and the others are kind of able to be reunited with Rika and Renamon and Calamon, because the DigiGnomes, I kind of feel like, help amplify Rika's voice inside of the digital stream, and that helps with reuniting them with Takato and Henry and the others. And, some of that stuff later on. But then there's also the moment where, Takato and Henry and Terriermon are separated from the rest of the group. And they end up in the underwater area, and they end up in like the giant underwater library, which, as I've stated before, already sounds like an amazing place to live as long as you can breathe in the library. They end up there, and they end up talking to Shibumi, and that's where Takato and Henry really get this explanation as to what the DigiGnomes are. Shibumi explains that, they're the ones that probably, interpreted Goemon's design and helped, realize him, actualize him. And, the DigiGnomes are just kind of like floating around, and they seem to like Shibumi. They seem to like keeping him company in like his, comatose state, where his, mind is in the digital world and his body's in the real world. And, so they're, kind of, getting an explanation there. Takato and Henry are getting an explanation as to what the, the DigiGnomes are, that they kind of might be responsible for where the blue cards show up. They're responsible for Gilmon. They're responsible for possibly where, like, the portal showed up that the kids could use to actually get to the digital world, because their wish was so strong to find Calamon. They went through that way, and things along those lines. So, Shibumi is explaining that they are kind of this catalyst for wishes, that it is the DigiGnomes' job to grant wishes. as I explained, they made Gilmon, they helped with Calamon getting free from the cage, they helped with making Calamon, creating Calamon from the catalyst to begin with. They help with trying to help Calamon get back to like Rika and the others and things along those lines where they can. Now, they themselves don't have a huge amount of power because, like, as I said, they were like scared off by Makuramon and stuff like that, which is understandable. Makuramon is a rather strong Digimon in comparison to a lot of the other ones they run into in the digital world. But there's also the moments where, the DigiGnomes aren't really set up for fighting. They're more like passive help, where they can, help with like, oh, well, Calamon's down that way and we need to get Rika to her. Oh, let's pull her into the water and drag her that way and, have her swept with the river that way to where Calamon is. And that type of thing. So it's like they have a mischievous side, but they also have, a helpful side as well. So it's like they are obviously based on like fairies from like, mythology and stuff like that, where, like pixies and fairies and stuff like that, and Neverland in Harry Potter. That was wrong. There are pixies in Harry Potter, freshly caught Cornish pixies to be precise. But in Disney and Neverland with Peter Pan, there's Tinkerbell and all of the other fairies and pixies and stuff. And yes, they can be helpful to humans, but they're also very mischievous as well to humans and the Lost Boys and to Peter Pan and Hook and, everyone else that's there. It's like, what kind of a mood are they in? Are they in the mood to be helpful? Are they in the mood to be mischievous? Are they in the mood to be angry and stuff like that? The DigiGnomes don't necessarily seem like they're capable of like hate or anger. Helpfulness, yes. Mischievousness, yes. Fear, to a degree. But depending on the size of the wish that they are trying to grant, they do not seem to have a setup for self-preservation. And I say this because when eventually when the Digi-Destined have finally, come to kind of a peace agreement with the Sovereign, mostly against Chuchelmon, but, having Azulongmon there and, the others. Azulongmon gives him this explanation of the Diginomes. He's like, yeah, I had them turn the catalyst into a Digimon and everything. And then we have the moment where Calamon is going to use his Shining Digivolution. And what happens is Calamon is there, and Calamon is, agreeing to help Azulongmon and stuff, and, he's, trying to find where his power is to set it up to, release it so they can, have all of the Digimon be able to Digivolve up to their Mega forms. Or all the way up to their strongest forms to help fight the D-Reaper. And what ends up happening is so many of the different Diginomes show up and they form around Calamon. And when Calamon uses his Shining Digivolution, they help spread that throughout the rest of the digital world to help evolve all of these different Digimon and make them even stronger. And then use that as a way to, like, as a beacon to, like, call them to the realm of the Sovereign to then help fight against the D-Reaper there. And so, so Calamon, so they grant Calamon's wish, but then as, like, the light fades, all of the Diginomes are gone. Now, that's not every single Diginome that's in the digital world. We also don't know specifically how quickly the Diginomes can be, like, reproduced and everything like that. Do they have a hive mind set up? Do they have, like, individual minds, combinations of that? That's not ever really explained, but they sacrifice themselves in order to grant Calamon's wish of spreading the light of Digivolution throughout the digital world. And they sacrifice themselves to grant that request. So, as I said, for small wishes, it probably doesn't take very much, like getting Calamon out of the cage or helping Rika get to Calamon. even necessarily, creating Gilmon, while that may have been a big wish in the scheme of things from, getting Takato a real life breathing Digimon, for them, it was like gather up all of this loose data and put it into this mold and then give it like a spark of life. But that didn't seem to like cost them their power or their life itself. Whereas this wish with, Calamon and Shining Digivolution, it does cost them. And they just kind of vanish afterwards. But they're not all gone. They're not quite all gone, because we have kind of two more instances that happen, because when the Tamers are all on their way back to the real world in the arc that was made by the Monster Makers, they find Marine Angemon hiding in Kenta's pocket, and there's a Digivice there. And my thought on this is that, yes, Kenta and Marine Angemon are a very good, fit for each other, but it was Marine Angemon that wished to be Kenta's partner, as opposed to like, oh, they're already a perfect match. That's why it didn't happen instantaneously when they first met, but it results in, that the DigiGnomes granted Marine Angemon's wish to be with Kenta. But the other thing is that when the arc gets grabbed by the D Reaper and it's having trouble flying away, I think it also gets that another Digignome is there, and it was granting, Marine Angemon's wish to get to be with Kenta, but it also helps with like getting the arc so it can fly away. So I think there's that too. There's not too much else that involves the Digignome showing back up again. I'm sure they have a part in getting, Doberman into the real world and getting Doberman so he can, help, the Digidestin with being, or the Tamers with being able to biomerge in the real world and stuff. So I'm sure the Digignomes were probably involved in that there. So we have that type of stuff. Also, after Ipmon / Beelzemon has tried to fight the D Reaper and tried to save Jerry, and he gets very badly injured, and he is reunited with Ai and Mako, that's when the Digivice finally appears, and they are finally revealed to actually be Ipmon's Tamers. And, the Digivice appears, and then, outside of the bus that they're riding on, we see a Digignome fly away. So that's implying that wish was finally granted to the three of them to be able to actually be, Digimon and Tamers. So I like that. So there's not too much. There's during the time frame that, there's, the Tamers are fighting against the D Reaper and everything like that. All of that stuff, the big battles that happen there and everything. And what ends up happening is at the end of the series, in the last episode, after the Digimon have been sent back to the digital world, kind of ripped away from their partners and such, and like they kind of think that maybe we'll never see them again, but they keep that hope alive. It's stated by Takato that he goes back to, where Gilmon had lived in the park every now and then, checking out some of their old haunts just to see if Gilmon's there. And eventually, one day, there is a Digignome, and it flies away, and I think Takato heard it. And then he goes back to the little cave thing that Gilmon lived in, and that's where the portal is. And that meant that they can go either back to the digital world and get their and get their Digimon, or that Gilmon and the others can then come back through the portal and get back to Takato and his friends and get back to their Tamers. So we have that. One final bit. The Digignomes do appear in Digimon Tamers runaway Locomon. They're not really super prevalent. Um, you know, they're kind of just at the end. And it's when Grand Locomon is seen just like driving through the digital world and everything, that there's just like some DigiGnomes that are flying around there. So they're not a big part of it. They're not like a huge part of the movie. Like they weren't granting Parasimon's wish to go to the real world and take over, Locomon and, blah, 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 blah. That wasn't their intention. I kind of think that the genomes have a little bit of like a moral compass in regards to like what's helpful to the digital world, what's harmful to the digital world. I would assume it depends on like the purity of the wish is kind of my answer. Or at least that would be my hope, that it depends on like the purity of the wish that they are trying to grant, and that can result in either like, oh, this is a good wish and yes, we will help grant it. This is like a bad wish, we don't really want to help grant this type of a thing. But that's just my thought. Headcanon is fun. So there's not really anything else here for the DigiGnomes. As I said, they have like them, the Digimon and the D Reaper have like this kind of a balance of power setup that gets thrown out of whack when the D Reaper reawakens and everything. So that'll be the next two videos. The last two videos in the Digimon Tamers series are going to be the history of the D Reaper, and then another video where I talk about the different forms that the D Reaper takes, all the different agents and everything like that it has throughout the course of the last part of the series. So that's what I have here. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye.